All right, so without further ado, we're going to kick it off to Mr. Ask ZBrush, Captain ZBrush man over here. Many different. In Joseph, I Drust, okay? It's a phrase, and I'm sticking with it. All right, so without further ado, we're going to kick it to Joseph's computer, where he's going to go show you guys a little tips, pros of ZBrush 4R8. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joseph Drust!
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Make sure I keep this ear thing on here. All right, so I should have a screen. Do I get a screen?
Yes. Computer switch will happen here.
So is anybody still awake? I mean, has anyone fallen asleep? You've been in the chair for the entire day watching this thing. You're out here at the Noman campus. So we're going to do a little thing we like to call, as soon as we get this video up here, we're going to do a little tips and tricks. So as you guys know, we have a ZBrush Live channel on Twitch. So if you go to zbrushllive.com, where if you guys are home, you might be watching this on the stream there. And with this, my ears are either too small or too tiny.
I'm going small.
Small? Because I never listen to you?
Because my ears are big and yours are small, so it works perfect.
So we're going to go through some ZBrush 4R8 top tips. So the guys at Ready at Dawn already showed some amazing stuff. I was going to show like 5 of them, but they did it for me, so I'm not going to do those anymore. But I have a few things I want to show you guys to help speed up your workflows and your processes inside of ZBrush 4R8. Now, I was going to ask Paul to help me with this during the event, but since Funko's presentation, I've been bonding with Mini Funko Paul, and me and him have really hit it off. We're good friends now.
He doesn't talk back.
Oh, what's that, Mini Funko Paul? Oh, you like alt-click navigation?
Yes.
Oh, Mini Funko Paul, that's hilarious.
No.
So me and Mini Funko Paul are going to go through some tips here. We have a lot of fun with this.
Okay. All right.
Oh, what's that, Mini Funko Paul? You would have given me a swivel chair. See? See? Mini Funko Paul.
He always wants a lot of stuff. Have you noticed?
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, you guys, with 4R8. So we've introduced live booleans, which a lot of you guys have been using. We've also introduced the VDM system, so the vector displacement mesh. And I haven't seen a lot of you guys doing stuff with this. And I'm a little, why not? So I want to give you some examples of the power of this functionality and what you can do with it. So let's say, a lot of people do anatomy practices, anatomy sculpts. So I've just gone through and I've just started, took a plane and just started messing with some quick faces. So just going through and just sculpting some various things. So I'm not looking at overly complex. You could detail these as much as possible, but you just can get a whole wide range of stuff. So if you have 10 minutes during your day, break out an object, sculpt a face on a 3D plane. So instead of doing it on a box, just do it on a plane. Now after you have these all created, you can now take these and create a brush out of it. So if I go back to this model here, which someday will be a beer smith at some point. So it's going to be a blacksmith plus beer guy. It's going to be amazing. And I load this brush at the top here. I have an IMM selector with all these different faces. So I come up here and just take one of these and then go to his face and simply draw this out. And I'm now going to replace that geometry with that VDM. So now we got, it's your boy. So there we go. So this is extremely fast. So now I can undo this. I can go select another face. You can use the toolbar up here or press M. And just cycle through different ones. So maybe I want to try this face here. I come to my model, now drag this out, and now I've got a new face for my character. Seconds. That took seconds, right? So you can go and build these libraries of these VDM shapes, make a brush out of it, and now you're just jumping ahead in your sculpting process. Now this guy needs a little bit of ears, so I'm going to go to my brush here, and I'm going to go to the Chisel Creature brush. I'm just going to grab the ear option here, and I'm just going to drag this out on my model. And so now I've just added another asset. So the vector displacement meshes are allowing you to get undercuts on your sculpting details. So instead of using normal alphas, convert them to vector displacement meshes, and then you can use them in a brush, and you're going to get a lot more flexibility and a lot more power out of them. So now I could say zoom in and switch to the move brush here and just add some different forms to this. I can smooth those transition elements out, and you can see I'm well on my way to a better designed or quicker designed sculpt. Now another thing
I have a question. The internet wants to know, does this guy take care of your backyard?
Mini Paul. Mini Funko Paul, what do you think?
Yeah.
Mini Funko Paul says to ignore you.
Okay. So they want to know. For those
He
that
could.
watch the stream, you know the joke if you watch the stream.
He definitely could take care of my backyard. He's not there yet, though.
Okay.
I got to finish him first. All right, so another thing with these VDMs that is hard to sculpt with traditional alphas, so 2D alphas instead of 3D meshes, is fur. So you can just come through and sculpt some patches of fur. So here I have a few planes here, and I just sculpted some fur. So I grabbed the plane 3D, divided it up, and just sculpt some fur. Now, as I'm sculpting these, make sure you add some overhangs to it, because that's the power of this system. And then I've just taken this and converted it to a brush. So now I have a fur brush. And now if I go back to my beersmith here, and I just start going to his hands here, I can just start drawing out fur on the model. And the fur that's being drawn out here is sculptural fur. So you can use fiber mesh, but this fur here is like what you would see if you're doing 3D printing versions of this or other elements. So it's taking those, and I can now apply these out and generate this fur on the fly on my mesh. So this is super powerful and super handy, especially if you're doing any sculptural fur details on your model. So I want to zoom in here. I can also add some chin hair to this guy, and just start playing with your design really quick. So the amount of time it's taking me now to do this is almost instantaneous. Now, you'll notice when I was drawing these out, I was also generating in a random fashion. So in your brush palette over here, if you open this up and you go to modifiers, you have this multi-mesh variation selector slider. And what this is going to allow you to do, it's going to allow you to set a value. So if you have it set to 1, it's going to cycle forward, 2 will cycle backwards, and 3 will cycle at random. So it's going to look at your IMM parts that you have contained in the brush, and then it's going to cycle through them. So with this one here, I have fur 1, fur 2, and fur 3, and as I draw these out, I'm going to draw out a different one every time. So it's giving me a random selector. So I can build this brush, have all these pieces of fur, and then as I draw them out, it's going to randomly give me one. So instead, I don't have to switch the brush. I don't have to change to which one I've selected. It's just going to choose one for me, and now I get variation in my design. So another really handy functionality with that. Now, another thing you guys may be doing when you're sculpting is you're moving around a lot. So you're sculpting, maybe on the arm here, and then you're going to rotate to the back and sculpt on the back. And so while you're doing this, you're changing your camera a lot. So you're shifting stuff around. You're moving this way. You're moving that way. And this can often, take some time. So if you need to dial in somewhere, and you need to zoom in and zoom in, I know Mini Funko Paul alt-click navigation is awesome.
No. Right-click army.
And so you're going to just move around your sculpt, and you're going to take some time to find that area, and then you're going to go in and sculpt that detail. Well, instead of manipulating your navigation like this, you can use timeline to your advantage. So I can go up to the movie palette up here, and I can go to the timeline area, and I can just turn on show. And this is now going to give me the timeline bar at the top of my navigation. With this, I can now go and position my model in space, and then I can come to the bar here and simply click, and this is going to add a keyframe on timeline. So it's now just stored this view. I can now zoom out to here, click here. I've stored this view. I can now move to the side, store this view. May want to zoom in to his hands, store that view. And so now I've just created a storage system of all these views. Now you can go up to the bar here and scrub through this, and it will play it like a movie. But if you use the arrow keys on your keyboard, it's going to jump to those stored positions. So this is going to allow you to store camera views and then quickly cycle through to get to those camera angles. So you can use this if you have a whole bunch of views stored. You can now quickly cycle through these with just the arrow keys. Get in, say sculpt this part here, go to the next one, sculpt the finger, may want to jump back out, see what it looks like, go back in, do a little more sculpting. So you can use this to your advantage to speed up your workflow and your processes. So that's another big one, just using timeline inside of ZBrush. So the next thing I want to go into is a masking feature. So I'm going to load another file here. And this file model here, Paul created, not you, Mini Funko Paul, real Paul. And Paul was making some knight armor here, and he wanted to go in and add some surface noise to his design here. So when you have knight's armor, there's often inlaid designs or etched designs on the metal itself. So I'm just going to isolate this part here, and let's say I want to add some pattern surface to this area. So if you wanted to mask this out, so I only had the pattern here and then didn't have the pattern in the other areas, you may just hold down Control and start masking like this. But this is going to take some time to do. So as you get closer to the edges like this, I mean, it's It's tedious work trying to get this masked out. You can definitely do it, but it's going to take some time. So instead of masking by just using the mask pen, I can come over here and I can select the Smart Transpose brush. So there's a transpose, but then there's also Smart Transpose. Now if I have Smart Transpose selected, I come up here and toggle my gizmo off. If I hold Control and then click and drag on my model, it's going to start masking with the Smart Transpose brush. And it's going to look at the surface. And as it looks at the surface, it's going to evaluate the transitions there, and now I've just masked that out in seconds.
I love it. It's been there for like 6 years.
So this is why we're doing this.
This is exactly what I use this for. Yeah.
And so another thing with this Smart Transpose brush is you can also add to a mask you've already applied. So if I hold Control and drag it out, and then I say I mask this, but then I decide I want to add, I didn't get all the area masked I want. Well, I can come over to another section, like over here, and hold Control and Shift, and then click and drag, and it's going to add to that mask now. So I can now add, say, mask one part, rotate the model, and add to that mask, and this is going to allow me to get that mask established where I want it. Now let's say after I have this masked out, I want to apply some of those details to it. So I'm going to go back to my draw mode here, and I'm just going to flip my mask by holding Control and clicking off the canvas. And now I should have this area unmasked, and everything else is masked out. So quick process using that Smart Transpose brush. So now I'm going to go down to the Surface Noise tab here, and we're talking about the etched designs and those elements that would be on some knight's armor. And so I'm not quite sure, especially if I'm in my design stage, I may have gone through and generated the shape, and then I've masked it out to get that effect. But now I want to, play with some designs or some different surfaces on this area. So I'm first going to open up Lightbox, and I'm going to come to the top here, and I'm going to click this little icon here, which is just going to shrink Lightbox a little bit. So now I can see Lightbox at the top, and I can see my model at the bottom. Now, this is just giving me a larger view to work with. And then I have a folder here with some various surface noises that I've created. So now, with these noises, I can come through and click through these, and I can see them update in my mesh on real time. So I can see, I kind of like this mesh here. I can go to the next one, some sort of honeycomb pattern. Not really going to fit a knight, but it is a cool little design if you wanted futuristic knight there. I got one that's got more like folded metal types effect. I've got one that's got fish scales, which looks pretty cool. And then finally we went with one that kind of looks like a floral pattern that Paul created and I've just applied. So using this surface noise, you can test out different things as well. So you can have all these different noises and then cycle through them just to get different designs or feels until you figure out what exactly you're wanting to do. So now I can go through and just continue this on the rest of my models as well. So if I wanted to add this pattern to the shoulder pad, I can now just hold Alt and click, and that will now change to that subtool. And then go back to, say, that Smart Transpose brush again, hold down Control, drag out, and it's going to now apply the mask to the other side. I can flip it, and then I could apply another noise to that area. So really fast process to just mask things out and apply surface noises to get different details. Now, in addition to the surface noises that would be applied to this mesh, Paul was experimenting with adding different circular elements to the armor. So a place where those top panels on the shoulders would pivot from. So you need some sort of rivet system to go through there to create that effect. And so Paul created another brush. So he has this IMM flower disc brush. And this is just a standard IMM brush, and it has these parts at the top here. So I can just click and drag one of these out. And as you drag it out, it's going to mask everything on your model and now unmask that flower part. Well, let's say I chose this one and I drew it on my model. But I'm not really sure if this is the one I want to have on my mesh. So I made all 7 of these discs, and instead of undoing this and redrawing it, what I can do is I can switch to the Move Transpose option and then turn that into the gizmo. And now I can come up here, and using this IMM preview bar, I can simply click, and it's going to update to the IMM in this bar. So this is going to allow me to position one IMM once, then I can switch to the Gizmo 3D, and then now, using this IMM viewer bar, I can cycle through the different designs. So it's going to allow me to look at all those one I've created in the exact same position. So it's just allowed me to play with my design a little more and figure out where I want these parts.
By the way, I did all those with just array mesh. It's a very low polygon and array mesh.
And then I tessellated the heck out of it.
Yes.
So another thing, after you have this done, you can also duplicate your parts around. So I can play with the size and change the location of this, switch to the other one, see what it looks like. And then after I'm happy with one of these, I can now duplicate it. And to do this, you're going to notice that this is just in the same subtool. You just want to make sure that your subtool has no subdivisions. So I've just removed the subdivisions on this. And then I'm just going to hold Control, and then I'm going to navigate over any of the move options on the Gizmo 3D and simply click and drag, and that's going to duplicate that part. So now I've created one of those, and now I can now reposition the second one, say on the back of the model, move this around, rotate it, and now I have that second asset generated on my mesh here. So this is a really handy functionality for going through and manipulating different shapes, cloning them around, and not have to manipulate different subtools, duplicate things out, and just give you the design you're looking for. So using the IMM viewer bar and the Gizmo 3D. So the next thing I want to talk about is some custom UI stuff. So inside of ZBrush, you can have different custom UIs. And I want to create a quick object here. So let me find my files. You can return lightbox back to the bigger view by clicking this here. I'm going to go and grab this file. And in here, I have an IMM strap. So if you guys have ever created insert mesh brushes inside of ZBrush, especially brushes that are triparts brushes that are broken into 3 polygroups to create curves. So this is a belt, and I created this file, and this is going to allow me, after I create it, to draw a curve out on my model and then see it update and change it, manipulate it around. So when you create these things, you're going to have to use 2 menus inside of ZBrush to do this. So you're going to have to go to the stroke palette to enable the curve function, and you're going to have to go to the brush palette and enable some of these options down here in the modifiers tab. So instead of jumping back and forth between those 2 menus, I've set up a custom menu that has both those options in it. So I'm going to go to Preferences here and just load this in really quick. And as I loaded this in, well, if I loaded it in, wait for it, wait for it. There it is. There it is. That's the one. At the top here, I now have a new palette that's been generated, and this is just called IMM Curve. So if I click on this, this is what this looks like. So now I could just go and navigate up to the top here, select my settings, go back to sculpting, go up to the top, select my settings. But that's a little tedious as well, so I have to keep going up to the top every time. So instead of doing that, what you can do is you can hotkey any of these menus at the top here. So if I go over the IMM Curve brush and I hold down Control and Alt and click, I'm now just going to assign this to a hotkey. And I'm just going to assign it to letter J on my keyboard. So now I come in and start sculpting, manipulating my model, press J, and there's that menu right there. So now I can access this at any time by simply pressing that hotkey. So if you have any custom UIs or anything in ZBrush, you can just make a new palette at the top and then hotkey that palette, and whenever you press that keyboard option, it's going to pop up that custom menu. So very handy for just speeding up workflows and processes as well. So now I just want to create a new insert mesh brush with this, with my UI. So instead of having to go to the brush palette and the stroke palette, I can now just simply press the J button here, and it's going to open that up. And I can just click Create Insert Multi-Mesh, and make sure my mesh is framed here. Press that J button again. And now I've just created a new brush here. And I'm just going to select the first strap here, and I'm going to go to my dynamic sphere here. And you'll notice as I draw this out, after it's just been created, it's going to give me this effect. So it's handling as it would if it was a default IMM brush. But since I've created this nifty menu here, I can press J, I can activate curve mode right here. I can turn weld points on, stretch, and adjust these modifiers. And now I can just draw this out on my model, and you'll see it drawing out like so. Well, that's great. I'm getting this nice strap here, but I also have these other variants. And if I look at these files in my original tool, you see I have a plain version. If I turn my polyframes here, a rivet, a hole, and a hook. And you'll notice as I cycle through these, the only thing that is different is this middle polygroup. So this is all different just in the middle. So this is significant because if I go back to my brush here and I go back into my custom menu, I can go now down to the multi-mesh selector here, and below that there is a variation slider. So this is a very similar process that I just did with that fur brush, where every time I drew one out, it was giving me a new piece of fur. Well, now I can set some settings here. So I set my variations to 4. And then next to it, there's a variation selector as well. And I can set this to cycle forward, so 1. And now if I go back to my model and draw out another curve, what it's going to do, it's going to take all those brushes and now take those parts and cycle through that middle section. So now I have plane, then I have the hole, and then I have the hook, and it's going to recycle that all the way through that strap. Now you can also add randomization to this, so I can go back and hit J, and come down here to the variation selector, set this to 3, and now when I draw this curve out, it's now going to use all of those parts that are in this brush and randomly cycle through them. So instead of just drawing one curve out, you can modify your triparts brushes and then edit them so you'll end up getting more variation to those straps. Now this isn't just nice for characters, it can also be used for environments. So inside of ZBrush there is a default brush that's in the IMM curve brush. So if I select this brush here and then I press M, there is a vine brush that is in this brush. And this one is set up with this same functionality. So there's 4 parts to this brush, and the middle areas, when this was created, are the only things that are different. So if I select vine 1 of 4, and now sculpt this out on my model, drawing that curve, you're going to see it's going to cycle those middle parts of that vine. So instead of getting this static vine on your meshes, you now have one that's a little more organic. So really handy little thing there. Now another thing you may be doing when you're using curves is you may start modifying them. So you're going to start drawing them out, and then you maybe draw it out and you find that, oh, it's not that long enough, it's not short enough. So you can always modify the curve after it's drawn out. So if you hover over part of a curve, say like this area here, and I click and drag, you'll see that there's this little red line here. So I can drag from here and then cross back over on top of the other edge of the curve, and it's now going to modify my curve. So I can use this to change the curve. So if I have a curve and I want it to be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, you just come to the area, click and drag, make sure you get that little red line, and then cross another section, and it's going to update that curve. So this is another one. If you've drawn a bunch of stuff out and you want to just modify that curve, you can always modify your curves on the fly. So little thing there as well. So now let's go into another little thing here. Are you guys still awake? Have I lost you yet? Oh, it's on.
And you can use more than 4 parts. You can use many parts, too.
There's no restriction on the amount of IMM curve parts you can do. No restriction.
Oh, there's a restriction.
All right, so now here's another one. So another little trick here. So let's say I have this shoulder pad here, and I just have some masking applied. And as we did earlier, we want to add some surface noise to that area. Well, I don't really have a texture that fits this. I don't want to do a random one, but I do have this board model, right? So what I like to do a lot inside of ZBrush is I'll take simple primitives, and then I can quickly generate a tiling texture to use with surface noise on another model. Now the process to do this is really, really fast. So with this wooden board here, I'm just going to take this single object that I've just sculpted on, and now I'm going to create a quick tiling texture. So I'm going to go to the document palette up here first, and I'm going to turn off Pro here, and I'm first just going to set in the size of the texture that I want to create. So I'm going to set the width and height to 512, and then I'm going to click Resize. And this is now going to take my canvas, and it's now going to resize it to those dimensions. So now this is 512 by 512. Now after this is resized, I still have my wooden board selected. I can drag this out. And I'm just going to go into edit mode and then frame it. And this is now framing this board to the extent of that sized canvas there. Well, I want a little cracks between these boards that I'm going to generate, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So I'm going to hold Alt and zoom out slightly just so I get a little border along the side there. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of edit mode. So now I'm out of edit mode, and this board is slapped onto my canvas. And so while this is on my canvas, if I hold down the tilde key and then click and drag, it's going to allow me to now tile this. So you see, as I move this around, it's tiling that board texture. So now oftentimes people will now draw another one out and then do the same process until they create that map. But you don't have to do that. You can use the layers inside of ZBrush as well. So if I go up to the layer up here, not the layer in the tool, I can now create a duplicate of this. So this is the one that's currently drawn. I can duplicate that. And now I can activate tilde on this new layer, and I'll be able to modify this. So I can place it over here. I can go to layer, duplicate that again, modify that, place this here, go to layer, duplicate again, modify that, place it, say, here.
You got an O.
One O. Yeah, duplicate, modify, maybe place this here. And then one more time, duplicate, and place this one here. So now, in just a few clicks, I've now taken that wooden board and I have a tiling map created. Now, after you've done this process, you want to make sure you merge all your files down. So if you go back to the layer here, there's this merge button. And this is going to take all those layers and merge them together into one. Now, after they're merged together, we go to the Alpha tab here, and we go to Transfer, and we can do a grab dock. And now we have a tiling height map or depth map. So now that we have this, we can go back to our shoulder pad now. So I'm just going to go to the document here, and I'm going to turn W size on, and then click New Document to return my canvas to the UI extents here. I'm going to go back to my shoulder pad, draw this out. I'm now going to go down to the Surface Noise tab here, open this up, turn on my noise, and now I'm going to load in that alpha that we just created. Now, after this alpha is loaded in, it's in Noisemaker right now. So another thing that Noisemaker can do is it can blend between two noises. So there's a default noise inside of ZBrush, and then you can blend it with either a noise that's loaded in as an alpha or with the noise plug system. So right now I have the alpha loaded in, so I'm going to change my strength just to give this a little more depth, and then I'm going to change my alpha scale just to make this a little bit smaller. And currently you're viewing this with two noises applied on top of each other. So it's got my boards, and then I've got the default noise applied directly over top of it. So the default noise, in addition to this noise here, is going to allow you to get greater variation on the texture you've created. So there's different blend modes for this noise. So right here we have mix, which is giving me a blend of both of them together. If I come over here and start cycling this, I'm going to be able to determine where I want that default noise to be applied. So if I have it on min, it's going to look at the black values on the alpha I've loaded in, and it's now only going to apply that default noise into the crevices of that texture. So now I have this nice kind of dirty inside area between these wooden boards. Now I can change the scale of this, I can change the scale of my alpha, and I can even adjust the strength until I get what I'm looking for. And then after I'm done with that, I can click OK, and now I have that board texture that I've just created in a few seconds applied to my model. So that process there is another really nice one that's really fast. Now I've gone through and just modified that, so this is the final board here for this. So I've got the boards on this shoulder pad. Now I have the shoulder pad created, now I want to put it on a model. Right? So it doesn't do much if it's just a floating shoulder pad. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it on Earthquake, since he's my favorite.
He is your favorite.
He is my favorite. He's so dreamy.
There isn't a demo you don't do that you don't use Earthquake. I'm going to be honest.
He's there. He's beefy.
Everyone raise your hand if you've seen a demo from Drust before. Has he ever not used Earthquake? Yeah, okay. His favorite model. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
All right, so the Earthquake file, however, if I go and load this in, it is a project file. So what that means, when you save a project file, ZBrush takes all the files in your tool palette and then stores it. But the shoulder pad here isn't in Earthquake's project file. So when I load Earthquake, it's going to replace the current project I have open. Well, I want the shoulder pad to live with Earthquake. So I could save this out as a tool over here and then import it back in. But right below this load tool and save as, there's a copy tool and a paste tool. So whatever tool you have selected, if you click this button, it's going to store that full tool into the memory on your machine. So now that that shoulder pad is stored in memory, I can now go to Lightbox, take Earthquake here, and load him in. And now, after he loads in, you'll notice my tool palette is gone, so my board is gone, my two shoulder pads are gone. But now I come up here and click Paste Tool, and voila, there's my shoulder pad. So I've stored that tool in memory, opened up another project, and pasted it in. So this is another great way to quickly transfer files between projects as well. So instead of exporting everything out, if you only have one or two, you can quickly just do this process. So now I'm going to go and select Earthquake here, and I'm just going to append in this shoulder pad here. So I just got my shoulder pad there. Make sure it's selected. And now I'm just going to use the Gizmo 3D and position it, maybe scale it down some, rotate a little bit here. Position it like so. Reset my transform as well. So oftentimes when you're modeling things in a production environment or just in general, you may have an asset that you want to keep in the center of the world. So let's say with the shoulder pad here, I want to make sure that it's always in the center world because I know that I'm going to use the symmetrical axis of the world to apply details, maybe continue sculpt on it, do anything I want. And then at any time, I'm going to use mirror and weld, and it's always going to replicate those details to the other side. So this is nice for sculpting an object in the center of the world, but I'm not seeing my object on Earthquake right now. So I want both worlds, right? I want to be able to sculpt on the center of a mesh And then I want to also see what this looks like on earthquake. So what I can do is I can go down here to the Array Mesh tab, and I can use Array Mesh to create a duplicate of the shoulder pad. So I'm going to turn Array Mesh on. I'm going to turn on transpose, lock position, and lock size. Now after this is on, I'm going to switch back to my transpose line here. I'm going to turn off the Gizmo 3D. And I'm just going to grab the inner circle with move transpose selected. I'm just going to position this up, maybe rotate it a little bit to the side here, and then rotate this. And I just want to get it so that it fits on his shoulder here. So let's take a little bit of manipulation with the transpose line here. And if it's a little bit too big, I can change this here in a second. I think I did make it a little bit too big. And I'm going to go back to my transpose here, or my Gizmo 3D, and I can rotate this and scale it down. Just get it so it fits on earthquake there. So just manipulating that a little bit. So now what I've done is I've used the Array Mesh option to take the original shoulder pad that's in the center of the world and now create a clone or an instance of that shoulder pad on his shoulder. So what this means is now anytime I come to this mesh here and I start sculpting, so say I start sculpting here, you're going to see it update on the shoulder pad on his mesh since it is an instanced object. So this will also work with any insert meshes or anything else. So let's say I have a metal part IMM brush here, and I want to apply this to the shoulder pad. So I come to this one here, which is in the center of the world, where I want to work on it. And I can just start drawing these out. And as you'll notice, after I draw these little metal reinforcements there, it's also updated on that other shoulder pad. So this is another quick way to model something in one area and see it somewhere else. And it's really handy when applying different assets to your models. Now you'll notice when I applied these metal bits to the shoulder pad, they're kind of sticking off the surface. So if I drag on this and drag out, you can see it's kind of overhanging there. Well, I could use a system in ZBrush called Matchmaker, so I could take an object and then have it match the surface. But also in the brush palette over here, in the modifiers area, there is a projection strength slider. And this is going to do, with an IMM brush, what Matchmaker does. So I can set my projection strength here to say something around 60, and now I can come to my shoulder pad and draw out these metal reinforcement bits, and you'll see it's going to match the surface of that model there. And as long as you have enough detail or density in your IMM part, it's going to adhere directly to the surface of the mesh you're drawing it out on. So now I have these metal bits, and they're adhered more to the surface. Now, since I put the surface noise of the boards underneath this, the density is, a little bit too much. So if it was metal, little reinforcements, it wouldn't be directly adhering to the wood. So I can clear my mask here. I can then isolate those guys by holding Control and Shift and clicking. And then I can go down to the Deformation tab here and just polish this a little bit. And now I've just created those nice metal reinforcements on earthquake. So another thing there, with an IMM brush, you can use the projection strength slider to adhere things directly to a surface. Now, the Array Mesh option is nice, but I often go to another level as well. So I can go back to the Array Mesh tab here, and down at the bottom there is a Convert to Nanomesh option. So this is going to take what I have here as an array mesh, and it's going to take every single duplicate part that I've now instanced, and it's going to take that part and apply it to a single polygonal plane. So if I click Create to Nanomesh, you're going to see I'm now going to get something like this. I'm just going to turn my painting back on. So now I have these shoulder pads, and there's this plane object attached to them. So this plane here is the surface, and the shoulder pad is now the nanomesh. So now this shoulder pad is linked directly to that plane, and it's looking at the polygroup that that plane has. So let's say I want to give Earthquake a shoulder on his other side. So I can hold Control, mask out that shoulder pad, I can invert it, I can then switch back to my Gizmo 3D, and I can click this button here to go to the unmasked area. I can then reset my pivot, and now I can hold Control and click, and what this process is going to do, it's the same thing we're doing with the floral patterns on Paul's Knight. It's going to duplicate the object. And what it's duplicating is that single plane of geometry. So as I click and drag, I duplicated a little bit too many there, it's going to now duplicate that plane of geometry, and that plane of geometry is linked to the shoulder pad. So now I can rotate this one around and reposition it. And so I can also go down to the Nanomesh tab here, since it is a nanomesh. I can turn off Show Placement so I don't see the planes. And I can now come through and now manipulate this shoulder pad here. And every single one of these shoulder pads is an instance. Now I can also duplicate this one more time and even use scaling with this. So I can come to this one here, maybe grow it out like so, rotate a little bit crazy here. And what I'm manipulating again is that plain 3D object. And I can go to his stomach, maybe scale this up. So now I've just generated Earthquake some crazy armor. So there we go in a few seconds. Now, since these are all still instance pieces as well, I can now just isolate this part out really quick, and I can go down the Nanomesh tab and go to Edit Mesh, and this will now allow me to edit that part by itself. So now I come through and say add a spiky bit. So we're going to go back to our creature brush here, maybe grab the spike, and just draw these out on the surface there. And then I can get out of Edit Mesh, and then go back and just turn all of Earthquake on here. So now I've just edited that part, and it's updated everywhere on the model.
Yeah, the key thing here, people, that's 4 polygons right now. That's all ZBrush is looking at, as far as polygon count, right? But his model's obviously not 4 polygons. Go ahead.
Okay, am I ready?
You're done.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah, so extremely powerful, especially for manipulating objects and using them in a fashion where you want to see things on all sides, but then maybe model things in the center of the world. So this is one I use all the time as well. So now another thing with Array Mesh here is I just want to hit on quick, if we go back to my file here, is that oftentimes when you're using Array Mesh, you want to take the array and you want to center it around the world. So let's say I have this wooden board that's floating off in space here. And what I want to do is I want to have it go around the center of the world. So if I go to the Array Mesh tab here and open this up, and I just activate it like normal, and then say change my rotate option here in Y to say 360, and then up my repeats, you're seeing it's looking at the local axis of the array. So it's just spiraling basically the repeats directly around the center point of the current mesh. Well, I don't want it to go around the center point. I want it to go around the center of the world. So if you have Array Mesh on, to reset your pivot so it goes to the center of the world, you just need to turn on lock position and then click reset. And now it has taken this Array Mesh here and it has now reset the pivot to the center of the world. So now I can go to rotate, type in 360, and you'll see now it's taking the repeat and putting it directly across the center of the ZBrush world. So now I can up my repeats to say something like 12. And now I have this kind of shape here. I can now switch back to the Gizmo 3D, and I can manipulate this. As you can see here, I can start modifying this on the fly to create different shapes. This will also allow you to get very interesting designs, especially for jewelry or other applications, where you can use the Array Mesh and this different functionality along that center pivot point of the world to get different elements. Now, after I have this created, we can now take this a little bit further. So let's say we saw my beersmith earlier. Now let's say I want to create a barrel for him. So you did guys see a little barrel here. So I'm just going to click, turn this into geometry by going to the geometry tab and convert this to geometry. So now this is true geometry. I've just turned off the array. And now with the Gizmo 3D active, I'm going to just center that to the middle of the mesh. And then I'm going to activate this customize menu here. So when you have the Gizmo 3D active, there's this customize button. And if you click on this, this is going to open up some deformers. So these deformers were a new addition inside of ZBrush 4R8. And I'm just going to come over here and select one of these. And now I have an FFD cage across my entire mesh. So now I can hold Control and Alt and just select those middle points and now scale these up. And now I've just gone through and created this kind of barrel shape really quick. So I used Array Mesh with a board, centered across the world, got that shape, modified how many segments I wanted, moved it in so it was nice and tight, went to the Gizmo 3D, and now applied a deformer. Now I go in here and accept that. So now I have this nice bend here. And now I need some other parts on this. So I need a top and then maybe a different shape to go on the edge. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to append in my board again. So I'm just going to take that. This is just another version of the board. I can now move this up, rotate it like so. So it's flush like this. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Down a little bit more. And now I'm going to do the same duplication process. So I'm going to hold Control and click and drag. So I have one of these. Now if you want a little more variation, you can flip these, do all sorts of stuff with that. And I just want to create a few of these here. So a section like so. Clear that out, and then maybe enlarge it a little bit. Bring back to the center there, just so it fills in the void there. So I was making a barrel for my beersmith here. Now you'll notice one thing with this is that it's extruding out the side of my board. So I can come through and use the clip brush to now clip this section out. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and come over here, and now I'm going to select the clip curve brush. And with this, I'm just going to start using this to clip the geometry. So the clip curve brush will go through and take the geometry and smush it. So if I drag this out and say do something like this, it's going to take the geometry that was here and smush it to that line. Now you'll notice if you use the clip curve brush, you need to be looking at where that clip is going to happen. So you'll see as I clipped in the surface here, I'm getting this kind of flange because I didn't have any geometry to support the mashing of all that topology. So instead of using clip, you can use trim in cases like this. And what trim's going to do, it's going to apply a slice functionality, and then it's going to come through and fill the holes. So I'm going to come over here and now grab the trim curve brush, and now drag this out. And as you drag it out, you're going to get this little line here. And I'm just going to come through and go across like this. I'm going to hit Alt to modify my curve as I draw it out and get something like that, and then release. And it's now going to trim this entire area. So now I've cleaned up that top area, and now I just need to repeat this on the bottom. So just coming through, drawing out this clip curve here. So now I've just applied those boards, clipped them, and now I have this barrel effect. Now I can take that part as well, which is this single shape, and I can now duplicate it with that control brush again. So now I have both sides of the barrel created. I can now add another element here. So if I want some sort of different effects, maybe some metal banding, I can append in a quick cylinder. I can grab that. Oh, let me append back to my board here. Go to that Gizmo 3D, scale this down, move it up. I'm going to activate some dynamic subdivision here. Maybe mask out the top part here after I scale this in. And now I've created that top band and a second band as well. So another quick way, just using different elements inside of ZBrush to model things really fast. Now I've taken this board barrel here and I've just reduced it down a little bit in polygon count and then also added some quick color information. Now inside of ZBrush there are many ways to apply polygrouping, which is a way you can isolate different parts on your model, things like that. Polygrouping can be applied by edges, it can be applied by normals, it can be applied by masking. There's all sorts of different ways you can apply polygroups. And this has some varying functionality. Now in here, there are some options in here that in the masking or the polygroups tab that you may not use or may not have any ideas on how to use. So one of these is the group visible option. So that's this option here under the polygroups tab. Next to this, there are some settings. So you have a coverage and you have a cluster. So I'm just going to come through here and set this to say 0.5 of coverage, and then I'm going to set my cluster to say 0.9. So now with these changed, if I click group visible on my model here, I'm going to turn off my fill so you just see the polygroups here. If I click group visible, it's now going to start applying randomized polygroups to my mesh. So you may think, well, what can I do with this? Well, let's say there's cold beer in this keg, right? You want a little condensation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this barrel here. So I have two of these. On the duplicated one, I'm going to hold Control and Shift. I'm going to select one of those groups there, make sure Soul is on, and I've just isolated that polygroup that was created with that random element. So now I can come through here and delete that, or not delete that. Let's one more time. Let's grab that polygroup again. We want to delete hidden. So Geometry tab, Modify Topology, and Delete Hidden. And now I just want to extract this out. So since it's the only thing visible on my mesh, you can use extract. You don't have to always use extract with masking, so you can use it as well with just visible geometry. So I'm going to go to the extract panel here and click that. I'm going to get this nice preview of that. So it's just taking those isolated single-sided polygons and now extracting them. Click accept. And now I have a new tool created. So I can turn on my old tool, and now I have a new tool. And with the new tool here, I can now polish these a little bit. So I can go to the deformation panel here, open this up, use the polish feature to just polish that a little bit, maybe divide it up a little, maybe come down here and inflate it some. And now you can see I've created this water droplet effect in no time at all. So another really cool functionality. Now let's say I want to give it a little more sheen or a little more design, because right now it just kind of looks like wads of wooden clay. So I'm going to come over here, I'm just going to fill it with a color, so maybe something with a little bit of a bluish hue, so maybe something like that. So I'm going to RGB here, do a color fill object on that. And then I want to select a new material for this, so I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to select one of these, let me find it here, the gel material, where are you at?
Right.
Gel shader. And now I'm going to apply that material in my model. So go to the material here and fill with that. And now I have this effect. So I've got that color and then this new shader and now getting more of this watery element. Now if I render this with BPR, this is the result I'm going to end up with. So I've got this here. Let me turn my floor on. But the water's still not looking too translucent. So if you want to know how to do translucency inside of ZBrush, you can go down to the display properties of the subtool you have selected, and then there's a BPR setting here, and here there is a button called BPR Transparent Shading. So if I activate this, I can now control the BPR visibility for the subtool. So I can set this to around something of 50 and then render with this again. And now I'm getting more of that watery condensation effect appearing on this barrel. So I've used those randomized polygroups, inflated or extracted those randomized polygroups, then inflated them, applied a new material, turned on transparent shading, and now I have this effect on my mesh. So really handy if you need to do a quick concept on maybe condensation, water, liquid, anything really fast. Now you can add some shadows to this as well, so I can go to the BPR slider here and just set this to something else, and then re-render, and now I've just added a little shadowing to that transparency. But you can see all the different ways you can kind of get different effects inside of ZBrush. So now I have two more things I want to cover quick. So the first thing I want to cover is hollowing. So another thing that ZBrush has used a lot of in industries is 3D printing. So if you guys have walked around, if you're here locally for the summit this year, there are 3D printers out there from all over. So a lot of our sponsors have allowed us to use these 3D printers for our contests, especially the Sculpt Off. So 3D printing is an industry that ZBrush has used a lot in. Now, one thing people often want to do is they want to print a model. So this is a robot that I created for March of Robots, which was founded by DaCosta Bailey. And this was just a simple model. And the goal that I took with this event in March was I was going to model these in ZBrush and then print them out in 3D. Well, if I printed this guy out solid, it's quite a bit of material. So I want to hollow him out. So what I can use is the dynamesh shell option. So I can go up here and just go to my subtool tab here. And to use the dynamesh shell option, you need to first have a subtool that has dynamesh active. So I go to the geometry tab here and go to dynamesh. You can see that the robot body here has dynamesh. And then you need a second subtool. And this is a subtool that will generate a hole in your mesh to establish where the shell is going to happen. So I'm going to select this hole here, and you can see it's just this cylinder object. So as I looked at this model, I'm trying to find an area where I can make a hole to establish the shell. So this one has an interesting design right here that I can fit. So it looks like it'd be a great place to put a hole or areas to start the shell to grow from. So I can preview this, how it's going to look with the live boolean system. So I go to live boolean here and activate that. And I go to the gizmo and move this in. And you'll see as I drag this around, it's going to give me a preview of where that hole is going to happen. So I'm using live boolean at this time just to establish, well, I need a hole for the shell feature. So I'm just going to be able to figure out where it is and see if the hole's there, it's not too noticeable. So that's going to be a good place for it. So that's using the live boolean for that. Now after I'm done with that, I can turn the live boolean off. And now I just need to take the mesh that has dynamesh active, make sure the subtool that's generating the hole is set to subtractive, and I just need to perform a merge down. So if I go here to the merge area and do a merge down, it's going to take my top tool, merge it into the second. And if I turn on my polyframes here, you're going to notice it's going to give that second subtool that was set to subtraction this white polygroup. So this white polygroup is telling ZBrush that the next time you dynamesh, it's going to subtract that part out. But it's also going to allow you to use this shell function. So in the Dynamesh tab under Geometry, there's a Create Shell button, and then you can also establish a thickness. Now when you click this Create Shell, it's going to take the thickness here, and it's now going to create a shell inside your model. Now depending on how many polygons your mesh has, it could take a little while to process, but after it's completed, you're going to end up with something like this. So here I have my robot here with the shell, and if I just isolate that inner part here really quick, let me switch back to my Select Rectangle brush. This is the shell that was created on the inside. So this is a mathematical calculation. So it's going through the entire model, and it's calculating the offset from that thickness that was set. So you're getting a precise thickness across your entire mesh. Now, as an example of how this looks, I also have another scene set up here with some geometry using the live Boolean system here, so I can actually preview this inner cut as well. So if I switch to my Gizmo 3D and draw this out, you can see this is the thickness that's being generated across this model. So you see it's very clean, and since it's mathematically calculated, it's looking at all the surfaces. So anything that had that thickness set, it's going to hold or retain across the model. So this is really handy for 3D printing. And so this is another great tool, just reduce the amount of material and allow you to print more on any of your 3D printers. So really fun little thing there. Now I've got one more final thing I want to hit on quick, and this is one that was requested. So if you're at the live summit today, the ZBrush Summit here, this was requested. So when we did the initial release of ZBrush, I showed this little toy joint. So I took a Boolean object and I moved it into a leg of a model, and I created a instant toy joints for articulation. So people have asked me, well, how did you do that? So I just want to quickly go through how I did this. So the basic premise here is we want to create a shape that is the negative of what that joint is. So if we have a leg here, what we want to do is duplicate the leg and then create the joint how you would do it with just traditional sculpting. So this is a leg from the demo soldier here. And then I've gone through and I've taken this leg and I've now applied, make sure I get here, how it would have this joint kind of look. Now I did rush this a little bit, so I did cheat a little bit to get to this level here, but I'm going to show you how you guys can do it. So you basically take one leg, you take a second leg, and you sculpt the joint in that second leg. So now you have two versions of this. You have the one that's completely solid and the one that has your sculpted leg joint. So now that you have these two, we can now calculate the difference between these two using the live Boolean system, and this is going to give us our joint object. So what that joint is going to look like if it was just the negative space. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to make sure that I have my solid one above the one that has the joint created. And then with the one with the joint created, I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to change its option to, make sure I have live Boolean on here, change its option here to the subtractive mode. And you'll see when this kicks on initially, since those two models are very much identical between those two areas, it's getting this kind of patterned effect. So these surfaces here are directly on top of each other. Well, if I just come through and go to, say, the move brush here and just scale this up a little bit, what's going to happen, you're creating a little bit of an offset, and now you're just left with the negative space of that joint. So now I have a 3D model, and this is what the negative space of that leg joint looks like. So now I can take this, refine it, and then end up with a brush that I can now use with the live Boolean system to draw this joint out and cut that exact joint in my model. So this is a little bit of high-level stuff here, but I was asked by multiple people to explain this, so I wanted to get it in this session here. So that's all I got, Paul.
No.
Is anyone still awake? Did I put anyone asleep? I want to thank Tiny Funko Paul for helping me out. He was a big help.
I'm always there for you. I'm always there for you.
Also, me and Paul, weekly, every other week, if you go to ZBrushLive.com, we do our own Twitch streams as well. So I do Ask ZBrush Live, and Paul does Did You Know That? And through those two streams, we cover a lot of this kind of stuff. And you guys, as the viewers, can ask questions as well. So you can vote on what Paul's going to show, and then I am pretty much live. So you have a question, and I will go through and try to answer that. So definitely check out both of those as well if you learned anything in this little tip section here.
Yeah.